The story begins with the fact that behind some young man, some beast began to growl loudly. This story began in some rather strange locale. There was a magnificent forest and huge mountains all around. Suddenly, a huge tiger with red eyes appeared in this forest. He has big, sharp teeth and a rather stocky body. This tiger stopped not far from the young man and began to growl loudly. The young man began to laugh and ask this tiger, "Is it him this time?" The young man continues to ask, "Is it that simple?" The huge tiger continued to growl regardless, and suddenly it attacked the young man. This man continued to stand motionless. Suddenly, this young man stopped the huge tiger with one hand. He just held the animal by the head. The sky was all covered in clouds and the moon was barely visible beyond the mountains. It was already deep night. The young man pushed the huge tiger straight towards the mountain. The man began to say that it was all quite boring. It's just a waste of time. On one of the paws of the huge tiger, one claw was torn out. The sky above the mountains completely cleared, morning finally began to come. In this luxurious forest, there were a lot of men running in an unknown direction. It was not even clear who these men were, why they were running in this luxurious forest at all. Suddenly all these men stopped and began to ask the other if they had found him. The other man replies that no, they haven't found him, he's nowhere to be found. One of the men says it's just some kind of curse. Where he? He asks the rest who knows where these documents are. One of the men shouted loudly for the others to find him. All the men ran in different directions, listening to the order of the chief. The young man walked through this magnificent forest and began to say that he already felt that he was even hungry. The man took something out of his pocket and began to eat. A very sincere smile appeared on his face. He was happy just because he started eating something. The young man continued to walk and said that he had run out of food and had no more money. In addition, now he is also homeless. Suddenly the young man stopped. He saw something that really surprised him. Some very strange, but very beautiful plant was growing in the middle of the healthy stones. The leaves of this plant were sown in a bright blue color. A young man approached this plant and held out his hands to it. He had a surprised smile on his face. The young man plucked this plant and began to say that he could not even imagine that he would find something so rare there. He was shocked by this very strange and rare find. The young man adds that if he sells this rare plant, he will definitely get plenty of money. He understood that he needed money very badly now. If he didn't get it, he could simply starve to death. The young man stood up and began to look around. Perhaps there is still the same plant there. If he finds at least one more of the same rare and very strange plant, he will be able to get a lot more money. Suddenly, the young man heard someone's conversation. One says that maybe we should look around, we should search a lot sooner, because the guards will arrive soon. Another began to laugh loudly and ask if he was afraid of the guards. The young man stopped and listened to the conversation further. Does anyone keep saying you can't just get rid of them? The young man saw that 3 men were allegedly stealing from the trailer. He immediately understood that it was a robbery. Suddenly one of those 3 men saw something. He was very wary. This man shouted loudly that there must be someone besides them. He stood and looked at the trees. This man with a bandage on his head began to take out his sword. A young man came up to them and that terrible man with a bandage on his head struck him with his sword. The young man was lying on the ground and holding his back. He says that a little more. The man with the bandage on his head calmed down when he saw that it was not the guards. He just worried in vain. Suddenly, the bandage on the man's head began to glow. He began to tell the young man that he would have survived if he had followed the main road, but he preferred to die by taking the secondary road. The young man was unlucky to run into them. The man with a bandage on his head adds that the young man should not blame them, he himself ran into them. The young man began to rise to his feet and ask what nonsense the man with the bandage was talking about. That man did not understand what he was talking about. What delusion. The young man looked up at the man with the bandage on his head and began to say, "Did they gather at such a time in the mountains and just discuss various nonsense? It's just a waste of time." The young man continued to ask if he understood correctly that these three men were simple thieves. They certainly could not be some glorious heroes or warriors. One of the three men became very angry and began to say that this young man was an ordinary ignorant bastard. "This is Jo Kong from the blood cult, he is the strongest in the entire world. How can this bastard even call them thieves?" The young man was surprised when he heard the name Jo Kong, but did not understand who he was and what other blood cult. The man got very angry and said that he would just destroy this ignorant bastard. The man began to run to the young boy and say that he had dug his own grave. It was necessary to watch what he said to a man like him. Suddenly, someone kicked that haunted and terrible man. It was a young man. He struck him with such great force that the man flew a great distance. The man with the bandage on his head was simply very shocked. He did not understand what had happened. Who could have hit him? The young man was blowing on his leg and said that he must have miscalculated the strength of his leg. The man with the bandage on his head mentally asked what it was all about. If nothing is done now, this young man just might become an even bigger problem than the guard. A man with a bandage on his head approached the young man and began to say what appeared to be a misunderstanding. The young man asked what he was talking about, the theft. The man with the bandage replied that they were not thieves, but the young man said that they were definitely thieves and no one else. Suddenly the man with the bandage began to take out his sword and say that he tried to solve this matter peacefully, but the young man is a very insolent bastard. The bandaged man swung his sword at the young man and added that he would pay for the blood cult's insult even after his death. The man with the bandage started running and saying that the young man will be afraid of Jo Kong. Suddenly, a man with a bandage flew up to the mountain. Someone hit him very hard. The guards rushed to that place. The young man hit the man with the bandage on his head, but the guard started attacking him. The guard began to shout loudly at the young man so that the video would finally just surrender. They asked the young man why he doesn't even try to hear them. The young man began to fight with every member of the guard. Night began to fall. The moon shone brightly in the sky. The young man defeated everyone and began to look for something valuable in them. He was surprised that no one had anything. He walked over to Jo Kong and began searching his pockets for something, but what was his surprise when he realized that even he had nothing. He did not understand how it could be that the thieves had no money at all. He had never seen or heard anything like this before. The young man was very disappointed and realized that he had simply wasted his energy. Suddenly, one of the soldiers of the guard ran to that place. He was just shocked. There were 3 guards lying on the ground and Jo Kong just motionless. A man began to call Jo Kong loudly. His assistant approached this man and began to speak to make Elder Lee Tae-jun calm down a bit. The elder began to say to his assistant that the bloodsuckers were right next to them, and he was asking him to calm down. Elder Lee Tae-jun slammed his fist on the table and continued to say that it looked like they were on the offensive. There are more and more henchmen of the blood cult. The assistant elder began to ask how Jo Kong knew about the transport of classified documents. Elder Lee Tae-jun began to ask his assistant if the blood cult had no way of knowing about the transport of secret documents. The aide quickly replies that they definitely couldn't find out about it. Elder Lee Tae-jun started to ask what kind of guys broke Jo Kong. Were they really not afraid to attack his squad? A man with long hair came to the elder and asked him if it was all true. Lee Tae-jun began to answer that it was only recently announced. He began to ask this girl if she knew that secret documents were being transported in that cart. So, they say that that cart was attacked by Jo Kong. The elder continues to say that one of the guards found them broken. When the guard brought reinforcements, they were all gone. Therefore, the elder wants this boy with long hair to check everything thoroughly once again. This boy with long hair began to answer the elder that he had already retired from all business, he was just a senior sergeant. The elder began to say that it was not at all important now, what he wanted. This is an order. Suddenly, Elder Lee Taejun closed his eyes and a small drop of sweat ran down his cheek. The elder began to say to the boy with long hair that the introduction of blood-forming agents is very serious. The boy replied that he understood it all. The elder continued to tell that it is possible that the bloodsuckers made an alliance with the demons, their power is growing very quickly and rapidly. The elder adds that the attacked cart was a big secret that only a few people knew. So. Suddenly, the young boy with long hair stopped short and thought. The long-haired boy continues that there must be a traitor among them who leaked all the information to Jo Kong. The elder answers the boy that everything is exactly as he said. The elder adds that it is necessary to deal with all this and then they will see what will happen next. The elder gave an order to the boy with long hair, he needs to find those people who managed to defeat Jo Kong. The boy replied that everything would be done. A young man from the forest came to the palace and began to say in his mind that he urgently needed to find a doctor. Suddenly someone started fighting with swords in that house. There were two men, but it was not at all clear who they were and why they were fighting. As it turned out, there were not two men in that room, there were 6 of them. One of those men began to speak loudly for the others to immediately surrender and put away their swords. But the other men continued to fight and began to say that there was no way they would give up. The two men looked at each other. Their looks were filled with aggression and anger. Suddenly, one of those men punched the other man in the stomach. He jumped on him and knocked him down. The red-robed man flew a very long distance and was stopped only by the wall behind him. The man in black approached the man in red again and swung his sword at him. He shouted loudly, "Get what you deserve." The man in black tried to hit the other man, but he missed and hit the wall. The blow was so strong that he cut the wall with his sword. The man in black again prepared to strike the man in red with his sword. This man cut through the wall again, but this time not just one. He cut through 2 adjacent walls. Suddenly the man in red stood up and picked up his sword again. The man in black stood ready at this time. But suddenly something really surprised the man in red, he saw something. All the other men were also very surprised by what they saw. That man in black clothing simply cut the pillar that held this house up with his sword. Suddenly, someone shouted loudly that the house was starting to collapse, they needed to get out of there immediately, because if they didn't, the house would fall right on top of them and kill them. All the men in black began to run away, and the men in red began to shout loudly that their opponents were running away, they needed to catch them immediately. One of the men in red ran after them and added that they needed to catch them all. At that moment, the house completely collapsed and collapsed. On the place where the house stood, only a huge pile of garbage remained and a big cloud of dust rose. Suddenly a girl came to that house. She was very shocked by what she saw. Small tears appeared in her eyes. The girl who came out and saw that house just fell to the ground. She started asking why. Why her house? Who could do such a thing? This girl continued to say that her house was now destroyed, only that clinic remained. How can she continue to live now? At the moment, she has absolutely no money to either rebuild this house or buy a new one. She lay there and thought about what she should do next. The same young man from the forest approached the hospital gate. He began to ask if this is the same clinic. It looks more like a normal house than a hospital. The young man knocked and opened the gate. The girl got up to see who had come to see her in the hospital. The girl approached the young man and began to speak, she kindly invited the man to Shin Yuma Hospital. The girl began to ask herself whether this young man had not seen her just now, had he? As it turned out, this girl is Shin Yuma's doctor. It was a clear day in the yard and white clouds were floating in the sky above amazingly beautiful mountains. The young man gave Dr. Shin Yuma a tiger claw he had plucked from the forest. Dr. Shin Yumi began to ask the man if he was only there to sell this bone. The young man began to answer that it was not an ordinary bone, it was a tiger claw used in medicine. Dr. Shin Yumi went on to say that she knows that this bone is used in medicine, but who will prove that this bone is not fake? The young man began to ask the girl, if she is a doctor, why can't she even recognize that? The young man's words made Dr. Shin Yuma very angry. She began to speak loudly. Did this man doubt her abilities? She addressed the young man with respect, she called him Mr., but continued to say that even studying the human body was incredibly difficult. Shin Yuma's doctor goes on to say that this young man dares to say that she should know the anatomy of every creature on earth. The young man agreed with the girl and continued to show what he had. What about these herbs? He asks. He really needs money very badly, he needs something to live on. Dr. Shin Yuma didn't even want to look at what the young man showed next. The young man calmly placed on the doctor's table the plant he had found in that luxurious forest. Dr. Shin Yuma took the plant in her hands and was surprised. It was a ginseng with 7 leaves. She asked the young man where he got it. The young man began to tell that he just saw it on the way here and just ripped it off. He asked the doctor how much she was willing to buy it for. Dr. Shin Yuma started to say that usually they cost 2 or 3 coins each, but this plant is in very bad shape, so she will buy it for 1 coin. The young man really didn't like the price and said it was very cheap. The girl began to say that this is a ginseng with 7 leaves, it is very rare. The young man did not even listen to the doctor. He says that he wants to get more money for this plant. Shin Yuma's doctor was very upset again. She asked the young man who he thought she was. Suddenly, 2 more men entered the hospital yard. They asked if it was a hospital. The doctor girl started saying that they guessed it was a hospital and she was her doctor, Shin Yumi. The doctor asked the men if they could wait a little. Men began to ask why this hospital looked like an ordinary house. Will everything be alright? The girl again began to answer those men that this is indeed a clinic and, unlike competitors, it is much better there. Suddenly, the girl began to ask the young man why he was smiling. The young man began to chase her to finally buy it and give him a coin, he still needs to buy himself something to eat. The man again asked the doctor if it is possible to recalculate everything with a fresh head. Dr. Shin Yuma gave the young man 1 coin and told him that if that was all, he should let the men in line behind him pass. Dr. Shin Yuma started calling the next clients who were standing behind the young man and waiting for their turn. 2 men approached the doctor and one of them began to complain that he had a very bad stomach ache. Shin Yuma's doctor started to say that they would give him an acupressure session and everything would go away very quickly. She invited him to go to another room. Suddenly, Dr. Shin Yuma took out the huge needle she needed for this particular procedure. She was holding this needle in her hands and looked very happy, but why she looked like that was not clear at all. Dr. Shin Yuma began to conduct an acupressure session on the man. When the session ended, they went out into the yard and the man began to say that he couldn't even believe it, his stomach didn't hurt at all anymore, he thanked the doctor and bowed in farewell. Little by little the evening came. The sun has already begun to set over the mountains. The sky began to be colored with various incredibly beautiful colors. Shin Yuma's doctor sat and said that she is very good, probably that's why she was able to cope with this hospital. Suddenly the girl raised her head and saw a ginseng with 7 leaves. She began to say that it was quite interesting if it even worked. Suddenly, someone entered the hospital and asked Shin Yuma's doctor if this was her clinic. The girl answered that yes, this is her clinic. This girl, who came to the hospital, began to say that something inside her was hurting very badly. Dr. Shin Yuma very quickly invited the girl to go inside. They entered the middle together and the Dr. Shin Yuma put the girl in the place for examining patients. Dr. Shin Yuma examined the girl and began to say that everything was not bad enough. She was very lucky that the doctor had medicine for such cases. Dr. Shin Yuma brought the girl ginseng with 7 leaves. Dr. Shin Yuma began to say that with the help of this plant the pain would go away and she would recover very quickly. The girl asked how much this plant was worth. Dr. Shin Yuma replied that it would cost 1 niang. The girl said that it is quite expensive, she does not have that kind of money now. Shin Yuma's doctor began to say that the girl could eat it now and pay later. In the meantime, she needs to eat the root of this plant in order to recover faster. The girl began to eat the root. The girl began to grimace and say that this root is very bitter and not at all tasty. Dr. Shin Yuma began to say that despite the taste of this plant, it is very useful for the girl's health. The girl continued that this root is too bitter, it is completely impossible to eat. Suddenly the girl screamed loudly. Dr. Shin Yuma started asking the girl what happened. Does it work? Is everything okay with her? The girl looks very happy, she said that it is the same ginseng with 7 leaves, now her stomach does not hurt anymore. The light energy of this miraculous plant passed through her and she became much better. The girl adds that Shin Yuma's doctor is very talented. The doctor was holding the plant in her hands and suddenly something surprised her. She asked what is it? Dr. Shin Yuma asked if it was the new ginseng with 7 leaves. The girl asked the doctor, ginseng with 7 leaves, is it the one that looks exactly the same as ordinary ginseng? Shin Yuma's doctor started to say that she thought it was the same ginseng. Shin Yuma's doctor continues to say that luckily this girl is fine now and they have nothing more to worry about. This plant is a little more expensive in price, the doctor will check the price of the plant again and give this girl a discount. Suddenly the girl said that she was very sorry. The doctor did not understand what she was talking about. The girl began to run away from the hospital and said that she would pay the next time she became rich. Shin Yuma's doctor did not understand at all what was happening, why the girl was running away. The doctor started running after the girl and begging her to stop. It was completely quiet in that luxurious forest. Clouds floated slowly across the sky, and birds were singing all around. Some strange boy began to ask the man with long hair what happened there, how could this happen? The man with long hair replied that he did not know the exact information. A man with long hair stood next to a tiger that was in a rock. This man began to say that most likely this tiger was killed with 1 blow. The men who stood behind were surprised how a huge animal could be killed with just 1 blow. The man with long hair continued to say that there were exactly 5 deep holes in the tiger's head, most likely left by a hand. It is quite similar to blood horse. All the men suddenly became very alert. The man with the long hair adds that it just looks like it though, it might not be exact. The man continues, if it was her, the style and force of the blow would be slightly different. He also began to remind that there are only 5 holes. The man adds that the strength that was tested there is much more important. It would hardly be within the power of a bloody master. The men behind began to ask, who then could do such a thing? The man with the long hair replies that he doesn't know yet, but there is something that worries him very much. The man with the long hair adds that he thinks someone is specifically imitating the blood master. The man behind him asks, in what sense is he imitating? But who is capable of such a thing? The man with the long hair continued to reason, first Zhou Kong who was suddenly attacked and his entire squad wiped out. He could not even think that all these events are clearly connected. The man behind him asked what he was leading to. Whoever attacks Zhou Kong must be one of Murim. This person even imitates the blood master. If he does it on purpose. But suddenly someone interrupted the man with long hair. One of the men began to say that this could not happen. The man with long hair just stood and quietly listened to what the man would say next. That man did not continue anything, so the man with long hair continued to say that then this man should start a war between Murim and the Blood sect. A very strange man was standing at the gate of the Murim League. There were a lot of different people in that Murim League. Everyone, near whom that strange man passed, began to bow to him and say to him, "My lord." Everyone was very happy about his arrival. This man began to ask, "How is the preparation going?" The men behind began to answer that everything was almost over. The young man came to the hospital again. He began to tell Dr. Shin Yuma that his plant, or rather, his ginseng, was given anew by this girl in the patient, and after that the patient just ran away. Dr. Shin Yuma started to answer that she didn't know it was a new kind of plant and she had no choice, but the patient was injured. The young man replied that he understood everything. Shin Yuma's doctor was very happy and started thanking him for his understanding. She says that she thinks this man is a very good person. But the young man adds that the doctor still has to pay him for it. Dr. Shin Yuma was very surprised by what she heard. The girl burst into tears and began to tell that she had spent all her money on this hospital. The young man began to say that this hospital looked quite expensive, in which case he could just rent it. The young man has laid down to rest, and Lin Yuma's doctor says that she will only allow him to stay in this hospital for one night. She won't let him stay here even tomorrow. The young man asked the girl how about the food. Food is also included. The girl was very surprised, but agreed with the young man. The young man began to ask the girl where she was going to sleep. If in the next room, then he would be very uncomfortable. Dr. Shin Yuma started to say that she has her own house, but suddenly she remembered that she no longer has a house. The young man asked what that meant. They would sleep there together. Dr. Shin Yuma shouted loudly, quietly. The young man says that his ears will just fall off. Little by little the evening came. The sky was interrupted by different colors, red, orange, yellow and blue. The young man began to ask the girl what about the people who destroyed her house. Shin Yuma's doctor started to say that she had already reported this, but they didn't do anything at all. The girl asked the young man if he didn't think it was pretty mean. The young man answered that it was so, but he did not even try to hear what the girl was saying to him. Shin Yuma's doctor asked her husband to show at least a little sincerity. At that moment, someone was running very fast to the hospital. A woman ran to the hospital with a child in her arms. She begged the doctor to save her child. Dr. Shin Yuma quickly ran to the woman and told her where to put the baby. Dr. Shin Yuma began to examine the child. The girl says that this child has a lot of energy in his body. How did it all happen? The young man says that this child must have trained a lot. The child's mother began to tell that she had eaten some plants in the mountains and that everything happened after that. Shin Yuma's doctor understood everything. She was so effective that the girl was poisoned. Shin Yuma's doctor says she needs something to calm her down. She will cure her, but it will not be enough, so you need to take this child to a big hospital. The young man began to say what he could do, but Shin Yuma's doctor interrupted him and asked him to bring her instruments. Shin Yuma's doctor says they have a little time for now. The doctor continues that her authority ends there. She asked the young man to inform the nearest hospital. The young man replied that he did not even know where this hospital was. Shin Yuma's doctor continues to tell the young man that if he tells the man across the street, he will do anything. The young man went where Shin Yuma's doctor told him to go. There was a rice shop. He conveyed the doctor's words to that man, and that man quickly ran from the store to the hospital. The young man began to say in his mind that he did not even know where the hospital was. Maybe he needs to inspect that broken house. It was already deep night. The young man went to the destroyed house. When the young man came to the house, he was simply shocked. The house was completely destroyed. He began to say that since they couldn't catch the criminal, they might as well pay her compensation. Suddenly, the young man saw something on the roof of a neighboring house. The young man quickly climbed onto the roof to see what was there. The young man says that, as expected, there are footprints on the roof. The young man quickly ran after the tracks. Maybe he will catch the criminal. He ran at such a speed that it was not even noticeable how he ran. Suddenly the young man stopped at one of the houses. The young man sat on the roof and began to say that the tracks lead only to that place. Suddenly, something really confused the young man. The young man began to say that he could ask those men, if he could get at least some information, then he could go back and abuse the girl. The young man saw 8 men fighting on the lawn, some in blue clothes and others in gray-brown clothes. The man in blue began to say that they would lose this position, there was no guarantee whether they would survive or not. Suddenly, a man in a gray-brown outfit asked who it was. It was a young man. He began to say that he was the one who caught the criminals. The men in blue started asking if this man was on their side. Another man in blue says thank you. The young man began to say that he did not know who these men were and did not know what they were thanking him for. The man in blue began to ask what? Isn't it clear that they thank him for it? The young man adds that he believes that he should not judge people only by their appearance. The man in blue says they are from the Muram League. Suddenly, one of the men in gray-brown clothing began to ask why this man was still there. Did he come there to look at him? The man in blue began to say that they had a big problem, he couldn't believe that another master was in such a pitiful situation. Suddenly, another man appeared next to the men in gray-brown clothing. This alarmed the man in blue. That man is the head of the bloody horse, Sibsalgui. Sibsalgui is a subordinate spirit in Korean martial arts culture that attacks humans. This man began to laugh and said that the man in the blue outfit had very beautiful eyes, and they were asking to be plucked out. This man continued to say that he would then tear out the man's tongue so that he would never be able to speak again in his life. The man in blue began to say that Sibsalgui was a master of masters. They should just back off. Suddenly, behind the man in the blue outfit, a young man began to say that he was very scared. Sibsalgui began to ask his wards who the man was. His wards quickly replied that this man appeared there suddenly. The young man began to say that those people were ordinary thieves, so he asked them not to be angry with him. The man in blue began to say what he had already said was Sibsalgui, a brutal killer who enjoyed watching others die. A man in a gray-brown outfit began to say that he was a henchman of Sibsalgui's blood brandy. That man in gray and brown clothes adds that this is not just a henchman, he is the right hand of a bloody horse. The young man began to remember, the right arm of the bloody horse, but wasn't Cho Ju Kong telling him exactly the same thing? The young man began to say that, in any case, this is not the first time he has heard that he is the right hand of a bloody horse. The young man asked, then how many arms does that bloody horse have? The man in gray and brown began to say that this man had better choose his words. Suddenly, someone put a hand on the head of a man in a gray and brown outfit. It was Sibsalgui. He began to say that he had not seen a puppy like him for a very long time. The right hand of the bloody horse began to walk towards the young man and said that insulting the bloody horse is already too great a crime. He will pay for it with his life. The young man asks, but what does he say? Directly with your life? The men in blue began to say that as long as all attention was focused on that young man, they would have plenty of time to escape. All the men in blue clothing ran away very quickly. The young man was left alone. The young man was very surprised, why did those men run away? When those men ran away, they started saying that they were running to call the soldiers. Sibsalgui has already prepared for battle. He says how this young man could afford such a thing. The right hand of the bloody horse adds how you can just take it and run away from it. Sibsalgui began to shout loudly that he would not leave anyone alive at all. Suddenly, all the men in blue came back very quickly. Sibsalgui was already very angry with what was happening around. Sibsalgui started to draw his sword and say that this man would be the first in line, but suddenly someone started to use it back. It was a young man. He hid Sibsalgui's sword back in its scabbard. The right hand of the blood horse was simply shocked. How could this even be? The young man asked Sibsalgui if he was going to kill them all. Suddenly, the young man struck the right hand of the bloody horse. Sibsalgui says that this man is a normal freak, but his hands are quite fast. Sibsalgui prepared to attack the young man again. The right hand of the blood horse adds that this man simply cannot dodge this blow. Sibsalgui adds that this attack is much sooner than this young man's hands, and much stronger than this young man can hit. The right hand of the bloody horse aimed straight at the young man's neck. But suddenly, the young man struck the blood horse's right arm before it could use its attack. The blood horse's right arm flew a very long distance, and his sword flew off altogether and stuck in a tree. The young man approached the right hand of the bloody horse. The young man began to say that he was quite surprised that he ran so close to him. The men in gray and brown began to say that, as expected of their boss, he took that brazen man down in a second. But when those men looked closely, they saw that it was not that arrogant man lying on the ground, but their boss. One of the men in gray and brown began to say, how is it even possible that he beat their boss so easily? These men very quickly realized that they were not his level. They had to leave there very quickly. They decided to throw their boss there and make a quick escape. Suddenly, the young man turned to the men in gray and brown clothing. The young man began to approach them closer and asked where they had all gathered. The young man continues to say that they are just a bunch of arrogant bastards. They are going to just run away and leave their boss alone. The young man began to ask if they were the ones who destroyed that house. They are just ordinary monsters. Those men in gray and brown clothes began to answer very quickly that they did not even understand what he was talking about. They did not want to make such a noise, they should only move. Suddenly one of the men in gray and brown began to say to himself that this young man had opened up, the end of this little bastard's luck had come. At this point, the young man continues to say that they can't fight right there. A man in a gray and brown outfit tried to attack the young man. He shouted loudly that he would take revenge for his boss. The young man at this moment says that he thought about going back and saying something loud, but it was all just in vain. A man in a gray-brown outfit standing in front of the young man began to shout loudly, "No." This man standing in front of the young man says, "Wait." The young man quickly turned around and punched the gray-brown clad man who was trying to attack him. This man flew a very long distance. A man in a gray-brown outfit was lying on the ground and could not even move. The young man came up to him and began to hold out his hand. The young man adds that he scared him very much. The young man goes on to say that he has heard that their boss is a murderer and it is their job to help him. The men in gray and brown clothes began to answer in fear that they did not look like him at all. They were threatened, they had no other chance. The young man adds that if these men help the killer, then they are definitely the same killers. The men in gray and brown clothes were very scared. They snuggled up to each other. The young man asked them if he was right. They are ordinary irresponsible bastards. A boy with a long hair came and started talking about how it was possible to drop yours and just run away. Where he? A man in blue clothes approached and began to say that they did not see anything. Another man says that most likely in such a situation they should have run away. The man with the long hair continues to say that if it's all true, then it's okay. But when they return, they will take responsibility for this irresponsible act. The man in blue clothes said that they understood everything and would do everything as he said. A boy with long hair asks who beat them to you. The man in blue began to say that they could do this work themselves. When these men wake up, they can ask them all the information. This is the best option. A man in a blue outfit started jumping on one of the men lying on the floor. This man adds that they are the right-hand bastards of the Sibsalgui bloodline. The man in blue began to wake up Sibwalji. This man looked very focused and at the same time quite angry. Another man in blue clothing came up and started to wake up the other man. They said that it was time for them to wake up. A boy with long hair stood and watched all this happening. The elder began to ask in what sense they had lost their memory. But these guys were beaten very badly by someone, they can't remember anything that happened that day. The elder asks the boy with the long hair if it is possible that they just tricked him. The boy began to answer that he checked everything himself, they really couldn't remember anything. The elder continues to say through laughter that this is all quite interesting as to who did it. The elder gave the order to investigate all this properly. He asks if they found out who did it. The young man with long hair took the glass in his hands and began to say something about Zhou Jie Gang. The boy with the long hair says that the tiger on the rock and even what happened to Sibsalgui seems to be done by the same man. This situation is quite unusual, for sure. The boy continues that he is probably one of the new 10 world masters. The elder became very angry and began to ask, 10 world masters? Does he mean any evidence? The boy with long hair replies that he has no evidence yet. The boy continues that the place where Zhou Jie gone, the tiger and Sibsalgui were beaten, if he draws a line on the map, it will be straight. The boy adds that this person most likely did not want to do that. He doesn't think he has any bad intentions. The elder began to say that this boy thinks that a great master came and just beat a bloody horse. The elder goes on to say that if they get it wrong, they might think it was all their plan. The boy with the long hair says that it can be so. The elder says that he will simply lose his mind. The boy says that he will go now and bring a detailed report. The elder asks Song Songjo what he means. Can't he just take over the lead of this investigation? He is the best of all in this. The elder held out his hand and followed the boy with long hair. Hospital. Someone threw a large piece of meat on the girl's table. Shin Yuma's doctor started asking what kind of meat it was. Did he sleep there last night because he had no money? The young man says that he received money last night. The girl asked the young man where he got the money. The young man answers that he went to the destroyed house because he wanted to get help, but he found 5 puppies. The young man continues to tell that he tamed those 5 puppies and they started stealing money. Shin Yuma's doctor asked what kind of nonsense he was talking about. The young man says that it is all true, with this hand. Shin Yuma's girlfriend says, is he sure he didn't do anything wrong? Shin Yuma's doctor says that if he had money, he could leave her hospital. The young man began to say that this is why he bought the pork. Does she think he has enough money to leave right now? The money that the puppies brought him ran out. The doctor did not understand what he was saying. The doctor began to talk about why he bought pork instead of paying for his own accommodation. She started kicking him out of the hospital now. The young man began to ask if she caught the person who ate his ginseng. The doctor began to say that yes, and maybe not, most likely no. The young man lay down and began to say that this is why he does not even think that he will leave there until she pays him. The girl understood that there is no point in kicking him out now, she will not be able to do anything. The young man began to ask how about last night? How does that child feel? The doctor continues to say that they have referred her to a major hospital. She is probably in perfect order now. Shin Yuma's doctor started to say in her mind that he came to her house and even helped the child, she thinks that he is not so bad after all. The young man lay and quietly looked at the doctor Shin Yuma. The young man began to speak in his mind and remember that as soon as the girl touched the child, she immediately understood what the reason was. She also saved her husband with acupuncture. The young man mentally adds that he is 100% sure that she is a very good doctor. Shin Yuma's girlfriend prepared food. She looked very appetizing. The young man began to eat. Shin Yuma's girlfriend asked how it was. Did it turn out tasty? The man tasted, but there was a rather incomprehensible emotion on his face. Did he like it or not? The young man asked Shin Yuma's girlfriend if it was real pork. The girl replied, if he doesn't like it, then let him cook it himself. Palace. His assistant came to the elder and was very surprised when he heard about 10 world masters. The elder began to say that they weren't sure yet, there was no way a master would suddenly fall from the heavens. The assistant began to ask if the elder was really sure that it sounded impossible. The elder continued to tell that the big problem is that he beat the bloodsuckers and escaped from their territory. The assistant asked why he did it. Was he trying to provoke the bloody horse? The assistant says that one of the buildings collapsed during the fight between the masked warriors, right? Is that master also involved in this? The elder goes on to say that he was notified that this was done by a group associated with the bloodsuckers. The aide asks what that means. The bloodmakers came there for a reason. And who is this master anyway? The aide adds that they are thinking of fighting him. The elder says that nothing is known yet, it is necessary to find out everything, but one thing is known for 100%. The elder says that this master is extremely dangerous. Association of Murim. Someone started asking if they were able to finally catch him. The aide says he wishes he could tell him that, but Shin Yuma's doctor began to ask what but. The assistant goes on to say that he is working hard on her house right now, so he already has a lot to do. The aide goes on to say that Murim's association is working on it, so she just needs to trust them. If she wants them to work better, she needs to pay more. The girl was simply shocked by what she heard. Shin Yuma's girlfriend came out and started saying that she already paid them enough and now they are asking for more. The girl continues to say that she doesn't even expect this to happen. Why do they want to make her wait forever? The girl left there, and a man was standing behind her and followed her with his gaze. It was a man with long hair. He asked his assistant what happened. The assistant was shocked by the long-haired boy's question. The assistant started to tell Henim that he could tell them to cancel today's practice. The boy with long hair did not understand what he was talking about. The boy with long hair says not to do that, it's time for them to go. Suddenly, someone started loudly calling Senior Instructor Kwan. Someone asked Senior Instructor Kwan what he was doing there. The boy with long hair began to ask what the girl who had just left there was. The senior instructor asked if he was talking about Shin Yuma's doctor. The boy was surprised. Doctor? What is she doing there? The boy with long hair asked why he was so polite. One of the instructors began to say that he was one of those who caught the killer. Another instructor suggested we discuss this over a glass. Senior Instructor Kwan agreed. He says they'll be done by today, he's just saving his life. One of the instructors says that it turns out that he is the only one who managed to catch him. Another instructor says that this is true, no one has yet managed this speed. Shadow Sword. Kwan Sungo. A bright sun began to rise far behind the houses. Shin Yuma's doctor came to the Sun Hospital. She stood in front of the front door and anxiously looked at the mountain. Shin Yuma's girlfriend carefully opened the door and entered the middle of the hospital. Inside, everything was incredibly beautiful. There were a lot of people in the hospital. There were doctors and sick people there. Suddenly, some girl loudly called Yuma's girlfriend. That girl ran up to Shin Yuma and hugged her. She began to ask if the girl had come to her. Yuma's girlfriend began to answer that of course not, she is working now. The girl from the hospital took offense at Shin Yuma and began to say that she knew that this girl was not always busy. Yuma's girlfriend began to say that she had come to this hospital to visit the child. The girl from the hospital remembered the child Shin Yuma's doctor was telling her about. The girl from the hospital says that she heard that Shin Yuma's doctor did a pretty good job. That child quickly regained consciousness and was already discharged from the hospital. Shin Yuma's girlfriend breathed a sigh of relief. The girl from the hospital hugged Dr. Shin Yuma very tightly and began to say that she needed to wait a little longer. If the girl from the hospital succeeds there, she will definitely bring Yuma's girl back. Shin Yuma's girlfriend started to leave Sun Hospital, but the girl from that hospital wouldn't let her go. Shin Yuma says she won't do that. Shin Yuma has her own hospital now. Suddenly, the girl from the hospital let go of Shin Yuma and shouted loudly, "Come on." Dr. Shin Yuma did not immediately understand what this girl was talking about. The girl from the hospital keeps saying that they just have to have a housewarming party right now. Shin Yuma's doctor asked if she was absolutely sure of what she was saying. Suddenly, a man came to Shin Yuma's hospital and started calling out, "Hanim." This man tells the others who came with him that most likely there is no one inside. One of the men went to the exit and started saying that now they better go for a drink and then come back a little later. Another man replied that it was just a great idea. Suddenly, these men saw Dr. Shin Yuma with a girl from Sun Hospital. One of the men says, "Just look at these girls." This man adds that he is just lucky. The man waited for his chin and quite slyly said that it was time to make some extra money. Shin Yuma's doctor began to tell the girl from Sun Hospital not to expect anything too grand. The girl from the hospital answers that now she has become even more interesting. Shin Yuma's girlfriend walked past one of the men, but something alarmed her very much. One of the men standing near the hospital hit the man Shin Yuma's girlfriend walked by. Another man ran up to that man and started asking if he was okay. The man who was hit started shouting loudly that his arm was broken. Shin Yuma's doctor stood very frightened. She began to say that it was his thigh. The largest of the men approached Shin Yuma and asked if she could hear him. This man continues to say that it was because of her that his brother broke his shoulder. Shin Yuma's girlfriend did not understand what this man was talking about. Shin Yuma's girlfriend tried to go to the man and started to say that since she was a doctor, she could help, but the biggest man stopped her. The biggest man keeps talking. Why should he believe her anyway? His brother says that he is in a lot of pain. The biggest man adds that now it's not her, but the two of them who have to take his brother to the big hospital. This man continued that first, she should pay him for the treatment. Suddenly, a girl from Sun Hospital appeared behind Dr. Shin Yuma. She began to say that this was simply unacceptable. The biggest man did not understand what they were talking about and began to ask the girls if they meant that they were lying to them. The biggest man swung his huge, chunky arm at the girls. But suddenly someone grabbed his hand and prevented that man from hitting the defenseless girls. The one who grabbed the hand was the same young man. The young man slapped that huge man and breathed a sigh of relief. The young man began to ask loudly why this huge man's arm had broken like a club. The biggest man began to wonder in his mind, what had he done? What happened? Suddenly, Shin Yuma's doctor started shouting loudly at the young man, how could he break someone's arm? The young man replied, what's the matter, he is a bad person. Shin Yuma's girlfriend continues to yell at the young man that this is definitely not the time to brag. She turned to the huge man and asked him if he was all right. Does it hurt a lot? The young man was very surprised by Shin Yuma's question, does it hurt a lot? The huge man very quickly replied that it did not hurt at all. Shin Yuma's girlfriend was very surprised, how could it be that the arm doesn't hurt, it's dangling like a rope, isn't it? This huge man needs to go to the hospital immediately. The huge man says that this will be unnecessary, it is definitely not necessary to do this. The young man looked horrified at the other men. When the young man turned to the man who had a broken shoulder, he began to ask, "His shoulder is broken, isn't it? That's probably why he can't get up." That man stood up very quickly and began to say that it was not so, that he was all right. All men began to run away very quickly and apologize. Dr. Shin Yuma started telling the men that it would hurt them a lot if they ran with broken limbs. The young man began to ask Shin Yuma's girlfriend why she was so worried about men like them. "She is too kind." Shin Yuma's girlfriend started aggressively replying that she is not good, it's all because he broke his arm. A girl from Sun Hospital ran up and started asking Shin Yuma who this man was. Is he her boyfriend? Are they dating? He is so cool. Shin Yuma's girlfriend started to answer that of course not. The girl from the Sun Hospital asked, "Then who is he?" Shin Yuma's doctor replied that she herself knew who he was, she had seen everything herself. The girl from the hospital said that he must be schizoid. He looks like a complete fool in front of them. Shin Yuma's girlfriend began to tell the young man that she was grateful to him in any case. Suddenly a young man stopped her. He touched his index finger to her forehead and began to say that instead of any words of gratitude. Shin Yuma's girlfriend didn't understand that he did such a thing, but she suddenly became very ashamed. Her cheeks turned red. The young man continues to say that in any case it will be better when she acts, it is much more important. Shin Yuma's girlfriend asked him what it all meant. The young man says that this means that she will cook meat for him today, because he has weakness in his body. Shin Yuma's girlfriend said that he is just a fool. They ate him yesterday, and now he wants meat again. The young man says that she herself told him that she is grateful, and any actions are much better than words. Shin Yuma's girlfriend started asking the young man what he was even doing there, she thought he was stuck in the lot. The young man answers her that she thinks he is so lazy that he sits in one place all day. Shin Yuma's girlfriend says to the young man, "I'm sorry, dohenessi." The young man did not understand anything at all. Shin Yuma's doctor began to ask the young man what he wanted for dinner today. The young man replies that everyone should try it at least once. The young man continues that he is talking about fish. The girl from the Sun Hospital was very happy when she heard about the fish. Shin Yuma's girlfriend wondered why she likes fish and pork much more. She offered them a drink. Suddenly that huge man asked someone what. It was a man, he was sitting on a stone and began to ask where he was. He told him that he needed to buy something to drink. Does he not respect him at all? The huge man began to speak, did he think he would come completely empty? The huge man began to say in his mind that he had stopped very in time, but this doctor and her hospital did not even have 100 coins. The huge man took out a bag of coins and gave it to the man sitting on the rock. He says that instead of booze he brought this. The man sitting on the rock laughed. He began to say that there was not even 1 coin, but as many as 10 coins. The man sitting on the rock says it's not bad enough. This should be enough. The huge man did a pretty good job. A young man was sitting at dinner and began to say that he knew that this was not enough for 3 people. The girl from the Sun Hospital began to say that it was so. She asked if there was some more meat. The young man was very surprised and began to say that she ate more than everyone else and now asks if there is any more meat. If she still wants to eat, she has to go and buy it. The girl from the Sun Hospital took out some coins from her pocket and said that she should just go and buy some meat. The young man was simply shocked. The young man took the coin and said that he would be back very soon. He ran out of Shin Yuma's hospital very quickly and told no one to go anywhere. The young man adds that this girl from Sun Hospital should come here as often as possible. Shin Yuma's doctor started asking the girl if she thought he was quite funny. The girl from the Sun Hospital says that he is hardly funny. As for her, he is quite cute. Shin Yuma's girlfriend asked how is it. The young man ran very fast and did not even notice other people. A boy with long hair walked past Shin Yuma's hospital. The boy with the long hair started saying that he thought it was just a house, but it was a whole hospital. The boy with the long hair started to say in his mind that Shin Yuma's doctor was shining all the same. He adds that it is very wonderful. The boy with long hair turned and left the hospital. Quite a lot of men were standing on the territory of one of the houses. They all stood in one place and talked. Suddenly, someone opened the door to the yard and began to enter. A man entered and everyone standing on the territory of the house began to bow to him. They said that at last their lord had returned. The lord smiled rather strangely and looked at his wards. The lord began to say that it was time for them to work, there was nothing to lie around all the time. Pub. There were a lot of people at the bar, so many that there was no way to warm up. The children ran and apologized loudly for disturbing other people's free movement. Suddenly someone was very surprised. Someone saw something very strange indeed. It was a girl. She tells her husband that she has already told him 100 times that it is enough to touch everything. The young man began to say that if he could not touch, then how could he evaluate the meat? The woman from the store started shouting, "Who gives free meat in the butcher's shop?" The woman from the store adds that she can't even do business on such days. The woman continues to say that she has never seen such an insolent customer in her store in her life. The woman from the store started talking in her head, maybe she should add salt or something. At that moment, the young man looked at the meat and said how beautiful it was. The young man began to ask the woman if they had any discounts. The woman from the store did not understand what he was saying. What kind of discounts can I ask about? The woman was very angry and shouted loudly that she does not give any discounts at all. The lord and his assistants entered the meat shop. The woman from the shop looked quite frightened. Is this the same boss Min? The lord approached the woman with a smile and began to ask if her business was going well. The woman from the shop removed the lord's hand from her face and asked why he came again. The woman adds that she will not sell him anything else. Lord began to say, how then will she become a successful businessman, if even she does not sell meat? And what about her sick father? The woman dropped her hands when she thought about her father. Just thinking about her sick father makes her very sad. The woman from the store began to shout loudly at the Lord, why is he doing this? The Lord simply smiled arrogantly. Lord began to say, as he had already told her many times, it was not him. He adds that he heard that it was a thief in a mask, and he did nothing at all. The woman from the store grabbed the Lord by his clothes and started shouting at liar that he was the fucking murderer, he did it. The Lord raised his hands and smiled. He says that what kind of killer is he? In general, he is a glorious warrior. The Lord turned to his wards and asked them if he was not telling the truth. His wards say that he is absolutely right, he told the whole truth. The Lord put his hand on the girl's head and began to say that she was in pain because she had no strength at all. The Lord adds that he will protect this store if she gives him half of her fortune. Then he thinks that her father will not be robbed again. The Lord continues that in such a case, if she surrenders her fate, then no one will rob her either. The woman from the store began to say that this Lord is an ordinary bastard, she will tell about his audacity and arrogance in the Murim Association. The Lord laughed and began to say, the Association of Murim? He adds that he definitely doesn't think so. Carrying all kinds of nonsense is definitely one of the highlights of this woman from the butcher shop. Lord continues to say that she is too young to understand the situation she is in now. Lord adds that he will teach her one lesson. Suddenly the Lord grabbed the counter with his hand. The woman from the store was very alarmed by this. What is he planning to do next? The Lord ordered his wards to destroy the entire meat store. He had a very sly smile on his face. Suddenly the Lord realized something that surprised him very much. The Lord began to say in his mind, "Oh man, is the counter glued to the floor? It turned out quite awkwardly. Suddenly someone shouted loudly that he would buy it. It was a young man. The Lord began to ask him who he is. The young man began to answer, "Can he really not see? He came to the meat shop in order to buy meat there. Isn't that obvious?" The Lord smiled and asked if the young man wanted to buy it all. Lord threw pieces of meat directly at the young man and began to say, "Does he want to buy this meat?" The young man did not understand what the Lord had done. In this store, everything was in pieces of meat. The woman from the store was very surprised. All the pieces of meat fell straight to the floor. The Lord began to laugh loudly and poke his finger at the young man. He tells the man that he is shaking like a normal dog. Suddenly, the young man could not stand it and kicked the Lord directly in the stomach. At that moment, a smile appeared on the young man's face. From the force of the blow, the Lord flew through his wards and the woman from the shop with such speed that he was not even noticed. The Lord was stopped only by the wall behind him. Everyone was shocked. The Lord's wards did not understand how an ordinary man could afford to hit the Lord. The young man sat down and began to cry. He says he just wanted a small piece of meat. The Lord's wards were shocked, they did not understand what was happening. One of the wards began to say in his mind that this young man is dressed rather poorly, and rather clumsy, but he is quite strong. The ward mentally adds that, after all, he is a novice who does not oppose him. The young man started to get up and aggression appeared on his face. The ward began to say that he was quite a noble young man, he could not believe that he dared to attack his right hand without any fear. The young man began to ask if this ward was a blood dragon follower. How many right hands does he have? The young man continues that they already need to change the name for the dragon hands. Suddenly someone got very angry and started saying that he is the one who. He didn't finish what he wanted to say. One of the wards began to say in his mind that he would teach him a lesson that he would remember for the rest of his life, since he was only a child. One of the wards continues to say in his mind that he will win at any cost. The ward mentally adds that it is necessary to take someone hostage. Suddenly, the woman from the store realized that the ward was heading straight for her. She covered her face with her tiny hands. The ward jumped up and kicked straight at the woman from the store. Suddenly, the young man began to say that because of these guys, there was no normal piece of meat left in the meat shop, and if they also killed the owner of this shop, it would be absolutely terrible. The young man adds, "Where then can everyone buy meat?" The young man struck the very ward lord. The young man approached the ward and began to look at him. Another ward was very shocked by the situation that had just taken place. The other ward began to say in his mind, "Is he really Gosu?" But in this case, he will definitely not stop. The ward mentally adds that there will definitely not be another chance. He started running towards the young man behind him. The ward directed his hand directly at the voice of the young man. Suddenly, the young man turned and hit this cunning and vile ward on the arm. The young man stopped this monstrous man just in time. Then the young man hit this ward also in the stomach. He was able to do anything to get his long-awaited piece of meat. The Lord's ward also flew a considerable distance away from the force of the young man's blow. The ward fell to the floor and hit his head very hard against the wall. The young man approached the ward lord. The young man began to speak very angrily, "My meat. What should he do now?"
If you have watched up to this point, then I am very grateful to you, because this is where the video ends. If it's not difficult for you, then like this video and subscribe to my channel. And if you want to continue this story, then write in the comments. Thank you all, I love you all.